I taught my daughter Rebecca everything she knew about cooking, paid for her culinary school education, and even mortgaged my home to help her open her first restaurant. But when she planned her lavish wedding to a wealthy businessman's son, I wasn't good enough to be on the guest list. What Rebecca never expected was that when her caterer canceled last minute, I would be the one preparing the food behind the scenes, or that her perfect day would unravel the moment her guests discovered who really created the spectacular feast. They couldn't stop praising. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I always believed cooking was about love. My grandmother taught me this truth, and I passed it to my daughter Rebecca during those Saturday mornings when she stood beside me on a step stool, her small hands covered in flour, learning how simple ingredients become something magical. Cooking is our family's language of love, I would tell her. Rebecca absorbed every lesson with natural talent. By 14, she could make béarnaise sauce from memory. At 16, her fusion dishes left dinner guests speechless. When she announced her dream to become a chef, I handed over my life savings, $45,000 I'd tucked away working as a school cafeteria manager for 20 years. The money was meant for retirement, but her acceptance to the prestigious Westfield Culinary Institute seemed more important. When she graduated at the top of her class, I mortgaged my modest home to help her open Homestead, her first restaurant. The local papers called it a revelation and Rebecca a prodigy. Nobody mentioned the woman who taught her everything, who still came at 5 a.m. to help prep before heading to her cafeteria job. I didn't mind being in the background. Mother's sacrifice, I told myself. Her success was my success. Then came Julian, the son of property developer Richard Harrington. He was handsome, polished, and wealthy beyond my comprehension. Their whirlwind romance lasted 6 months before engagement. I noticed the change in Rebecca almost immediately. She would wince when I used the wrong fork, or interrupt me when I told stories about our old apartment. "Mom, nobody wants to hear about that," she would say with a tight smile. Julian was always polite, but something in his eyes when he surveyed my modest living room suggested he found it lacking. When Rebecca called about her engagement, she bubbled with excitement about the venue, a historic estate with gardens overlooking the valley. The Harringtons were handling most arrangements. "That sounds wonderful," I said, mentally calculating what I could contribute. "Just let me know how I can help. I could make the cake or handle some of the food." Her laugh cut me off, brittle and embarrassed. "Oh, Mom, that's sweet. But this is going to be a very sophisticated affair. We've already contracted Paloma Bianchi for catering. She trained in Paris and Milan." "I see," I said, swallowing my hurt. "Well, I'm here if you need anything." "Actually," Rebecca said, "could you watch Scooter during our engagement party? We'll be at the Harrington estate and pets aren't allowed. I would be pet-sitting while my daughter celebrated with strangers." "Of course," I agreed. After that, my calls went to voicemail. My texts received delayed responses. 3 months before the wedding, a cream envelope arrived. My hands trembled as I opened it, expecting my daughter's wedding invitation. Instead, I found a note card. "Dear Martha, we're having the wedding at Rosewood Estate on June 12th. Ceremony at 5 p.m. sharp. I know it's far, almost 2 hours, so I've arranged a hotel room. You can bring a small gift, but please know the registry is at Neiman Marcus and Bergdorf's only. Rebecca." No formal invitation. No RSVP card. Just instructions, as if I were a distant acquaintance. I called Rebecca immediately, but reached voicemail. I left a message asking about the formal invitation, thinking there was a mix-up. 2 days later, she texted, "No mix-up." The real invitations are just for the actual guests. Didn't want to waste one. The note has all the info you need. Actual guests. Not me. The next morning, I called again. This time, she answered, "Mom, I'm in the middle of something. Can this Wait, why am I not invited to your wedding properly? I'm your mother. A long sigh. You are invited. I sent you the details. A handwritten note isn't an invitation. Why don't I get a real invitation like everyone else? Julian's parents are very particular about appearances. They're inviting important people. The mayor, state senators, business associates. The Harringtons have certain standards. And I don't meet those standards. Please don't make this difficult. You can come to the ceremony and reception. Isn't that enough? What about the rehearsal dinner? The bridal shower? Those mother-daughter moments? Her voice hardened. Those are just for the wedding party and close family. The words hit like a physical blow. I'm not close family? Julian's mother has planned everything very carefully. There are seating charts, place settings. It's all specific. I took a deep breath. Rebecca, I raised you alone after your father left. I worked 2 jobs. I gave you every penny for culinary school. I mortgaged my home for your restaurant. How am I not close family? Silence then. This isn't about the past, Mom. This is about my future with Julian and the Harringtons. I never thought I'd be something you'd be ashamed of. I'm not ashamed, she snapped. I'm practical. Julian's family moves in different circles. Why can't you just be happy for me instead of making everything about yourself? I have to go, she said, finally. We'll talk later, but we didn't. 2 weeks passed without a word. Then, 1 month before the wedding, my phone rang at 7 a.m. Rebecca was panicking. Mom, Paloma's team just canceled. Food poisoning outbreak at another event. Everyone's sick. The wedding is ruined. Calm down, I said. You'll find another caterer. In 4 weeks? For 300 guests? During peak season? Everyone good is booked. I could hear the desperation in her voice. What about your restaurant staff? We can't close Homestead for 3 days. We're booked solid. I took a deep breath. I could help. Mom, be serious. This isn't a family dinner. It's a high-end wedding with a multi-course tasting menu. The dismissal stung. Rebecca, who taught you how to plan complex meals before culinary school? Who catered every school function? That's different. No, it's not. I managed a school cafeteria for 30 years. I fed 800 children daily on a shoestring budget. I planned more meals than most chefs do in their entire careers. And I still have connections with local suppliers who owe me favors. I could get ingredients that would make Paloma Bianchi jealous. Silence. Then, you really think you could do this? I know I could, but there would be conditions. What conditions? I work behind the scenes completely. Nobody knows I'm involved, especially not the Harringtons. I'll need a budget for ingredients and staff. And I pick the menu. Julian's mother had specific ideas about the food. Then Julian's mother can find another caterer in 4 weeks. Rebecca exhaled slowly. Fine. You can handle it. But nobody can know you're involved. I'll have my assistant contact you. What Rebecca didn't know was that in the years she'd pushed me to the margins of her life, I hadn't stopped growing as a chef. I'd taken advanced courses, traveled to Italy, Thailand, and Mexico for cooking classes, and built a reputation for special occasion meals. I'd even been developing a cookbook, Invisible Hands, the unsung culinary wisdom of school lunch ladies, just accepted by a respected publishing house. None of this interested Rebecca. She had moved beyond her beginnings, beyond me, but now she needed me, and I would help her. Not because I was a doormat, but because I had one last lesson to teach my daughter about what it truly means to cook with love. What I didn't tell Rebecca was that I had no intention of remaining invisible once the plates were served. The next morning, Rebecca's assistant Vanessa called to arrange the details. Her voice was crisp, professional, the kind that managed problems without acknowledging emotions. Mrs. Sullivan, I'll be transferring funds to your account for ingredient procurement and staff. We need receipts for everything, of course. Of course, I replied. I'll need the Rosewood Estate kitchen specifications and access to the venue 3 days before the wedding. 3 days? Vanessa sounded alarmed. That's not standard. Neither is replacing a caterer 4 weeks before a 300-person wedding, I replied calmly. I'll need time to properly prepare. This isn't a backyard barbecue. Vanessa cleared her throat. I'll speak with the venue. What about your team? I'll handle staffing myself. I have connections with excellent professionals. Mrs. Sullivan, these need to be high-caliber service staff who understand the expectations of the Harrington social circle. I smiled to myself. My team will be impeccable, I promise. Now let's discuss the menu. Vanessa began reciting Mrs. Harrington's preferences. A 7-course progression beginning with Osetra caviar on brioche points, followed by a chilled asparagus velouté, then butter-poached Maine lobster. No, I said simply. Excuse me? That menu is uninspired, predictable, and frankly, it's been done to death at every society wedding for the last decade. I could almost hear Vanessa's jaw drop through the phone. Mrs. Sullivan, with all due respect, these selections were made by people who equate expense with quality, I finished for her. I'm not arguing about this. Rebecca agreed that I would create the menu. Tell Mrs. Harrington that the replacement caterer has proposed an elevated seasonal tasting menu featuring locally sourced ingredients. If she wants specifics, tell her it's a surprise. There was a long pause. Mrs. Harrington doesn't like surprises. She'll like this one, or she can scramble to find another caterer in 4 weeks. Those are the options. Another pause. I'll convey your position. Good. Now about the payment. I'll need half up front to secure the ingredients. Some of what I need will require special ordering. 3 hours later, $30,000 appeared in my account. I smiled at the notification on my phone. The average wedding meal costs around $75 per person. Rebecca's would-be mother-in-law had budgeted $100 per person, not counting alcohol. A statement, not a meal. I had no intention of using all that money on food. My plan required something else. That afternoon, I reached out to my old friend Miguel, who had left his position as sous chef at the Grand Meridian Hotel to start his own small catering company. Martha, it's been too long, his voice boomed over the phone. What can I do for you? I need your help, Miguel. A special project. Very discreet. I explained the situation. Miguel listened quietly, and when I finished, he let out a soft whistle. That's cold, Martha. Your own daughter treating you this way. It is what it is, I said, not wanting to dwell on the hurt. Can you help? Of course. My team and I will be your front. We'll handle the service, the presentation, everything public-facing. You can work your magic in the kitchen. Thank you, Miguel. I'll need 8 of your best servers, all in proper formal attire. Consider it done. But Martha, are you sure about this? You deserve recognition for your work. Don't worry, I said. I'll get exactly what I deserve. Next, I called Sophia, my old colleague from the school district who had retired to start an urban garden collective. Her network of small local farms produced some of the most exquisite vegetables and heritage meats in the region. I need the best of everything, Sophia, whatever is at its peak right now, and I'm willing to pay premium. For you, Martha, I'll make it happen. But this isn't for one of your community dinners, is it? No, I admitted. It's for my daughter's wedding. That's wonderful. I didn't know Rebecca was getting married. I hesitated. It's complicated. I'm handling the catering, but nobody knows it's me. I'm supposed to be invisible. Sophia's voice grew quiet. She's ashamed of you? She's trying to impress her future in-laws. They're very wealthy, very connected, and very foolish if they think money makes better taste, Sophia said firmly. I'll gather everything you need, Martha, and I'll make sure it's spectacular. Over. The next 3 weeks, I refined my menu, testing and perfecting each dish. I drew inspiration from the meals Rebecca had loved as a child, but elevated them with techniques I'd learned over the years. I wanted the food to tell our story, her story, in a way that only I could. For the first course, I created a delicate amuse-bouche of whipped goat cheese with honey and thyme on a crisp seed cracker, a sophisticated version of the after-school snack I'd make for Rebecca when money was tight. For the soup course, not a predictable velouté but a bright, early summer tomato consommé with tiny herbed dumplings, a nod to the magic soup Rebecca had requested whenever she was sick as a child. The fish course would be seared scallops with brown butter and lemon, served with pea shoots and nasturtium, flowers, inspired by Rebecca's first attempt at fancy cooking when she was 12. The main course would feature perfectly roasted rack of lamb with a complex sauce she'd always struggled to master, until I taught her the secret. And for dessert, instead of a traditional wedding cake, I planned individual chocolate soufflés with lavender cream, the first truly difficult recipe she'd mastered under my guidance. Every dish held meaning, every flavor a memory. This wasn't just food, it was a mother's love story told through cuisine. If this was to be my final gift to my daughter, it would be one she could taste but never fully explain to others. 2 days before the wedding, I arrived at Rosewood Estate with my team. Miguel and his staff handled the introductions while I slipped in through the service entrance. The kitchen was immaculate, all stainless steel and marble, with every modern appliance a chef could desire. Mrs. Harrington was there for the initial walkthrough, her slim figure wrapped in expensive casual wear, her blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon. She looked like an older, colder version of what Rebecca might become. "I still don't understand why we couldn't get the full menu in advance," she complained to Miguel. "How am I supposed to know if it will be appropriate?" Miguel smiled his most charming smile. "Mrs. Harrington, our chef creates custom menus based on the finest seasonal ingredients available. What's at its peak today might not be tomorrow. That's the beauty of truly elevated cuisine. It's responsive to nature." "Well, I expect excellence," she sniffed. "The Crawfords had Paloma Bianchi for their daughter's wedding last year, and everyone is still talking about it." "Trust me," Miguel said. "After this wedding, no one will be talking about Paloma Bianchi anymore." When she left, Miguel found me, in the prep area, already organizing my workspace. "That woman is a piece of work," he muttered. "Now you understand what my daughter is trying to become," I said, tying my apron. The following day was a blur of preparation. My hands moved with practiced efficiency, each cut precise, each flavor balanced to perfection. I worked silently, focused, while Miguel's team handled the logistics around me. No one questioned my authority in the kitchen. They simply followed my instructions with respect. Late that afternoon, Rebecca appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked tired, stressed, not at all like a happy bride on the eve of her wedding. "Mom?" she called, her voice small. I looked up from the rack of lamb I was trimming. "Hello, Rebecca." She glanced around nervously. Is it going to be okay?" I set down my knife. "Everything will be perfect. I promise." She twisted her engagement ring, a diamond the size of a small pebble. "Julian's mother keeps asking about the menu. She's driving me crazy." "Tell her it's handled." "But what is the menu? I need to tell her something." I wiped my hands on a towel. "It's a surprise." Rebecca's face paled. "Mom, please. This isn't the time to be difficult. These people, I interrupted, will have the most memorable meal of their lives tomorrow. That's all you need to know." She looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperation. "This wedding is so important for my future. For the restaurant. The Harringtons know everyone in the industry. They could make or break me." I felt a pang in my chest. Was that all this was to her? A business opportunity? "Rebecca," I said carefully, "do you love Julian?" She blinked, caught off guard by the Question. Of course I do. He's perfect for me. I noticed she hadn't actually answered my question. Then focus on marrying him tomorrow. Let me worry about the food. She hesitated, then nodded. As she turned to leave, she paused. Your note card, with the wedding details. I shouldn't have. We can talk about that later, I said, turning back to my work. After the wedding. Right, she said quietly. After the wedding. That night, I slept in a small staff room at the estate, despite the hotel room Rebecca had arranged in town. I wanted to be close to the kitchen, ready at dawn. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about what would happen tomorrow when the truth came out. Would Rebecca be furious, humiliated, or would she finally see what had been in front of her all along? I wasn't sure. But after decades of standing in the shadows, I was finally ready to step into the light. What I didn't tell anyone, not even Miguel, was that I had reached out to James Porter, the food critic for the National Culinary Review. He was an old acquaintance who had once judged a community cooking competition where I'd taken first prize. When I explained that I was secretly catering my estranged daughter's wedding, a daughter who had become a celebrated chef using techniques and recipes I had taught her, he was intrigued enough to accept an invitation. He would be there tomorrow, incognito, as my personal guest. Whatever happened, the truth about who really created Rebecca's culinary genius would finally be known. The stage was set. All that remained was to serve the meal that would change everything. Wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as if the weather itself had been arranged by the Harringtons. I was in the kitchen by 5 a.m., my mind clear, my hands steady. This was far from my first high-pressure cooking situation. For decades, I'd prepared meals for hundreds of hungry children with limited resources and impossible deadlines. Compared to that, a wedding for 300 wealthy guests was almost straightforward. By noon, the kitchen hummed with controlled activity. Miguel's team moved with choreographed precision as I directed every element. The amuse-bouches were assembled, the consommé was clarified to perfect transparency, the lamb was reaching room temperature before roasting. Everything was on schedule. Then, Vanessa burst through the kitchen doors, her usual composure shattered. Mrs. Sullivan! Mrs. Harrington is insisting on a tasting, right now. I looked up from the sauce I was reducing. That's not possible. We're in full production. She's threatening to stop the wedding if she doesn't approve the food first. She says no daughter of hers will be embarrassed by substandard catering. I wiped my hands on my apron. Technically, Rebecca isn't her daughter yet. Please, Vanessa begged. She's making a scene. The bride is in tears. I glanced at Miguel, who gave me a subtle nod. I'll manage here, he said quietly. With a sigh, I removed my apron and chef's coat, replacing it with a clean one from my bag. Where is she? The main dining room. And Vanessa hesitated. She's brought friends. I found Mrs. Harrington seated at the head of an elegant table, surrounded by 4 other women dressed in expensive casual wear. Their jewelry caught the light as they gestured, their voices carrying that particular timbre of entitlement that needs no amplification to command attention. There you are, Mrs. Harrington said, not bothering to stand. I need to sample the menu immediately. I remained standing, hands clasped behind my back. Mrs. Harrington, with all due respect, were in the middle of preparation for 300 guests. A tasting at this point would compromise our timeline. I don't care about your timeline, she said dismissively. I care about my reputation. Gloria here had Paloma Bianchi for her daughter's wedding last spring, and it was exquisite. She gestured to a thin woman with overly taut skin who nodded smugly. I understand your concern, I said, measuring my words. However, a wedding meal is meant to be experienced as a progression. Tasting individual components now, out of sequence and without proper plating and presentation, would give you an inaccurate impression. Are you refusing? Mrs. Harrington's voice took on a dangerous edge. I'm explaining why it's not in anyone's best interest, including yours. One of the other women leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Aren't you a bit mature to be a head chef? I thought all the top chefs these days were young innovators. Before I could respond, the double doors to the dining room burst open, and Rebecca rushed in, still in her robe, her hair half-styled, her eyes red from crying. What is happening? She demanded. The hairdresser said you're threatening to cancel my wedding over the food? Mrs. Harrington's expression softened slightly as she addressed her future daughter-in-law. Darling, I'm simply doing my duty. The Harrington name carries expectations. I need to ensure the catering meets our standards. Rebecca looked at me, panic in her eyes. Can't you just give them something to taste? Please? I could see the desperation in her face, the fear that her perfect day, her perfect future, was unraveling. I thought of all the times I'd come to her rescue as a child, solving her problems, soothing her fears. Old habits die hard. Fine, I said. I'll prepare a small sampling. It won't be the full experience, but it should address your concerns. Mrs. Harrington smiled triumphantly. Excellent. We'll wait. I returned to the kitchen and quickly assembled 5 small plates, miniature versions of each course, arranged. With care but lacking the full presentation they would receive later. Miguel raised an eyebrow as he watched me work. You're giving in to them? I'm picking my battles, I replied. This isn't the moment for a showdown. When I returned to the dining room with the tray of samples, Rebecca had disappeared, presumably to continue her wedding preparations. Mrs. Harrington and her friends were laughing about something, cocktails now in hand despite the early hour. Set each plate down carefully. Ladies, this is a simplified preview of today's menu. From left to right, whipped goat cheese with honey and thyme, summer tomato consommé, seared scallop with brown butter, a taste of the rack of lamb with sauce, and a chocolate petit four in place of the soufflé, which can only be served directly from the oven. The women stared at the offerings, clearly not what they had expected. Where's the caviar? Mrs. Harrington demanded. There is no caviar, I replied calmly. But that's standard for a wedding of this caliber. This menu tells a story, I explained. Each dish has been specifically chosen to create a meaningful progression. The women exchanged glances, then tentatively began to taste. I watched as their expressions shifted from skepticism to surprise, and then, reluctantly, to appreciation. The lamb is quite good, Mrs. Harrington admitted, sounding almost disappointed. The sauce is exquisite, added Gloria, the Paloma, Bianchi devotee. What's in it? Family secret, I replied. Mrs. Harrington set down her fork. It's acceptable. Not what I would have chosen, but at this point, we have no alternatives. She fixed me with a cold stare. I assume the presentation will be more impressive than these samples? The full service will be appropriately elegant, I assured her. Very well. She stood, signaling the end of the tasting. Ladies, shall we check on the flowers? As they filed out, one of the women lingered behind. She was older than the others, with silver hair and intelligent eyes. That consommé, she said quietly. I haven't tasted one that pure since Paris in the 80s. Trained at Le Cordon Bleu? I smiled slightly. Self-taught. She nodded, impressed. Even more remarkable. They don't appreciate what you've done here, but I do. She glanced toward the door where her friends had exited. Don't tell them I said so. I have a reputation as a food snob to maintain. With a conspiratorial wink, she followed the others, leaving me alone in the dining room. I gathered the plates, feeling a small surge of satisfaction. At least one person recognized quality when she tasted it. Back in the kitchen, we shifted into high gear. The ceremony would begin at 5 p.m., with dinner service starting at 6:30. Every minute was accounted for, every step choreographed. I lost myself in the rhythm of cooking, the familiar dance of timing and temperature, the alchemy of transforming raw ingredients into art. At 4:30, Miguel tapped my shoulder. "Martha, you should change. The guests will be arriving soon." I glanced down at my chef's coat, spotted with the evidence of hard work. "I'm not done here. We can handle the last steps. You should see your daughter get married." I hesitated. In truth, I hadn't planned to attend the ceremony. The note card invitation had made it clear I was an afterthought, not a true guest. But something in Miguel's expression made me pause. "You're her mother," he said gently. "No matter what's happened between you, this is a moment you can't get back." With a sigh, I nodded. I quickly washed up in the staff bathroom and changed into the simple navy dress I'd brought for the occasion. Nothing fancy. I couldn't afford fancy, but clean and dignified. I tucked my hair into a neat bun and applied a touch of lipstick. I slipped into the ceremony space just as the music began. The garden setting was breathtaking. White roses everywhere, crystal chandeliers somehow suspended from the trees, white chairs arranged in perfect rows. I took a seat in the very back, partially hidden behind a large floral arrangement. The processional began. Julian entered with his parents, Mrs. Harrington resplendent in pale blue silk, her arm linked possessively through her son's until they reached the front row. Then Rebecca appeared at the far end of the aisle, and despite everything, my breath caught. She was beautiful. Her gown was modern and sleek, her dark hair swept up with tiny pearl pins. She practically floated down the aisle, her face glowing with happiness and hope. In that moment, she wasn't the ambitious chef or the social climber. She was just my little girl, stepping into her future. I felt a tear slide down my cheek and quickly wiped it away. This wasn't the time for sentimentality. I had a job to finish. The minister began the ceremony. I slipped away, back to the kitchen where real work awaited. The staff looked surprised to see me return so quickly. "The soufflés won't bake themselves," I said with a smile, tying my apron back on. The ceremony ended right on schedule, and guests moved to the cocktail area while photographs were taken. My team executed the service flawlessly, trays of champagne, and canapés circulating through the elegantly dressed crowd. From the kitchen window, I caught glimpses of the reception, the ornate place settings, the crystal glassware, the elaborate floral centerpieces. Everything screamed money and privilege. I wondered if Rebecca truly fit into this world, or if she was just playing a part, much as she had accused me of doing when I offered to cater. At precisely 6:30, the guests were seated, and service began. The amuse-bouche was met with appreciative murmurs. The consommé elicited outright praise. By the time the scallops arrived, the dining room was buzzing with excitement. "They're loving it," Miguel reported, ducking back into the kitchen between courses. "I've never seen such a response at a wedding. Usually people are just waiting for the dancing to start." I nodded, focused on plating the lamb. Each plate was a work of art, the meat perfectly roasted, the sauce glossy and aromatic, the vegetables arranged with precision. This was the heart of the meal, the crescendo before the finale. As the main course was served, I instructed Miguel's team to begin preparing the kitchen for the soufflés. These temperamental desserts would be my greatest challenge. 300 individual chocolate soufflés, each needing to be perfectly timed and immediately served. It was audacious, even reckless. No caterer in their right mind would attempt it. But I wasn't just any caterer. I had just slid the first batch of soufflés into the oven when Rebecca appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her wedding gown. "Mom," she called over the kitchen noise, "you need to come out here." I looked up, startled. "I can't leave now." "The soufflés?" "Please," she insisted. "Everyone's asking about the chef. They're saying it's the best meal they've ever had." I froze, my hand still on the oven door. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Yet now that it had arrived, I felt strangely uncertain. "Your husband's family. I said carefully. They wanted me invisible, remember? Rebecca's expression was unreadable. Just come, please. I glanced at Miguel, who nodded encouragingly. Go, Martha, we've got this. I removed my apron and chef's coat, smoothed down my dress, and followed Rebecca into the dining room, where 300 of Boston's elite were finishing the main course, the buzz of conversation filling the air like music. What happened next would change everything between us forever. Rebecca led me through the swinging doors into the dining room. The space was transformed. Candles flickered on every table. Crystal glasses caught the light. Flowers cascaded from tall centerpieces. 300 faces turned as we entered, conversations quieting. At the head table, Mrs. Harrington was deep, in conversation with an elegant older man seated beside her. Next to them sat Julian, handsome in his tuxedo, looking somewhat bewildered as he glanced between his mother and his new bride. Rebecca guided me toward the center of the room, then stopped. I expected her to make some polite introduction, perhaps thank the caterer for stepping in at the last minute. What I didn't expect was silence, Rebecca frozen beside me, clearly struggling with what to say next. Mrs. Harrington rose from her seat, champagne glass in hand. Us? Is this the chef? We should acknowledge such an interesting menu. Her tone managed to make interesting sound slightly insulting. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt all eyes on me. This plain woman in a simple navy dress, certainly not the sophisticated culinary professional they expected. I saw confusion on some faces, dismissal on others. Yes, Rebecca finally said, her voice barely audible. This is Martha Sullivan, I interrupted, my voice clear and steady. Head chef for this evening's dinner. Mrs. Harrington raised an eyebrow. Well, Martha, I must say the lamb was quite good, though rather unconventional for a wedding this caliber. Before I could respond, the silver-haired woman from the tasting spoke up. Diana, stop being ridiculous. This is the best meal I've had at any wedding, including your first 3. This drew scattered laughter. The chef deserves our compliments, not your backhanded praise. Diana Harrington's smile tightened, but she inclined her head slightly. Of course, Elaine. We're all enjoying the meal immensely. From a table near the center, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s stood. I recognized him immediately, James Porter, the food critic who had accepted my invitation. My pulse quickened. Excuse. Me? He said, his authoritative voice carrying across the room. I'm curious about something. Each course has been not just expertly prepared, but deeply thoughtful, almost like a narrative. I'd love to know the inspiration behind this progression. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment I had dreamed of. Recognition, respect, the chance to claim my rightful place. I could feel Rebecca tensing beside me, perhaps sensing what was coming. She placed a hand on my arm, a silent plea or warning. I took a deep breath and made my choice. The menu tells a story, I began, my voice growing stronger with each word. It begins with whipped goat cheese and honey, simple ingredients elevated through technique, just as humble beginnings can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Heads nodded, appreciatively around the room. The tomato consommé honors the turning point of summer, when potential begins to manifest, clear, bright, yet complex beneath the surface. The scallops represent precision and care. One moment too long in the heat destroys perfection. James Porter was smiling now, nodding with understanding. The lamb, I continued, with its sauce of 30 ingredients reduced to essential flavor, shows how complexity can appear simple when mastered. And the soufflés still to come represent the leap of faith required for any worthwhile achievement. Timing, chemistry, and courage all working in harmony. A warm murmur of appreciation spread through the room. I could feel the energy shifting, the respect growing. Even Mrs. Harrington seemed begrudgingly impressed. But, I said, pausing to look directly at Rebecca, There's a more personal story behind these dishes. Rebecca's eyes widened with alarm. This was it. The moment I could expose her ingratitude, reveal her shame of her own mother, make clear to everyone that the celebrated chef of Homestead had learned everything from the woman she hadn't properly invited to her own wedding. James Porter leaned forward slightly, pen poised over his notepad. The room grew quiet, anticipating revelation. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. Behind the sophisticated exterior, I could still see traces of the little girl who had stood on a step stool in our kitchen, eager to learn, desperate, to please. I remembered her first successful recipe, her tearful failures, her determined persistence. Whatever she had become, whatever choices she had made, that little girl was still part of her, and she was still part of me. These dishes, I said softly, are inspired by the journey of becoming, by watching someone discover their passion for food and develop it into art, by the privilege of witnessing talent bloom. I turned to address the room more broadly. Every chef is shaped by those who came before, by techniques passed down, by wisdom shared, by traditions both honored and transformed. This menu celebrates that legacy of knowledge, flowing from one generation to the next. Rebecca's grip on my arm relaxed slightly, confusion replacing fear in her eyes. James Porter raised his glass. To legacy, then, and to an extraordinary meal, 3. 100 glasses rose in response, a sea of crystal catching the light. To legacy, the guests echoed. As the toast concluded, the silver-haired woman, Elaine, spoke again. Martha, are you connected with a restaurant? I host a monthly dinner series, and I'd love to feature your work. Before I could answer, Mrs. Harrington cut in smoothly. Actually, Martha is my mother, Rebecca said suddenly, her voice ringing, clear across the room. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the distant clink of dishes from the kitchen, the soft hum of air conditioning, the barely perceptible intake of breath from 300 surprised guests. Mrs. Harrington's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Your mother? She looked between us, disbelief etched on her face. But I thought your mother was a school cafeteria manager, Rebecca finished. Yes, for 30 years. She fed hundreds of children every day, working with limited budgets and impossible constraints. She's the most innovative, resourceful chef I've ever known. I stared at my daughter, hardly believing what I was hearing. Everything I know about food, Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger. I learned first from her, before culinary school, before my restaurant. She was my first teacher, my most important teacher. Julian stood now, moving to join his bride. Rebecca, you never told me your mother was so talented. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. I never told anyone. I wanted them to think I was special, self-made. But the truth is, I've been standing on her shoulders my entire career. Mrs. Harrington looked as though she had swallowed something sour. But the note card. You said your mother was... I was wrong, Rebecca cut her off firmly. I was shallow and insecure and desperately trying to fit into a world that I thought mattered more than the people who truly loved me. She turned to face me fully, tears now streaming down her cheeks. Mom, I am so sorry. I've been horrible to you. Ungrateful. Dismissive. You gave me everything, and I treated you like you were nothing. The room remained silent. 300 people witnessing this raw moment of revelation and regret. I felt my own eyes filling with tears. James Porter cleared his throat. If I may, he said gently, I'd like to share something with the room. He stood, addressing the guests. For those who don't know me, I'm James Porter, chief critic for the National Culinary Review. A ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. Even Mrs. Harrington straightened in her seat. I've been following Martha Sullivan's career for years, he continued, long before she began developing her cookbook, Invisible Hands, The Unsung Culinary Wisdom of School Lunch Ladies, which I'm delighted to announce will be published this fall by Meridian Press. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. Rebecca's eyes widened. "You're publishing a cookbook?" she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Martha's approach to food is revolutionary in its honesty, James continued. She understands that true culinary excellence isn't about expensive ingredients or culinary school pedigrees. It's about understanding the essence of flavor, the science of technique, and the art of nurturing through nourishment. He raised his glass again. We in the culinary world often overlook the wisdom of those who cook not for acclaim, but for love. Today's meal was a masterclass in what that love can create. 300 glasses rose once more. "To Martha Sullivan," James proclaimed. "To Martha Sullivan," the room echoed. Even Mrs. Harrington, her face a complex mixture of emotions, lifted her glass. "Now," James added with a smile, "I understand there. Our souffle's waiting, and timing is everything with souffles." Laughter rippled through the room, breaking the tension. I nodded gratefully to James, then turned to head back to the kitchen. But Rebecca caught my hand. "Mom, wait." She hesitated, then spoke so only I could hear. "I want to help with the souffles, like we used to do together." I looked at her, my daughter in her beautiful wedding gown, asking to stand beside me in the kitchen again. "Are you sure? It's your wedding reception." "I'm sure." She squeezed my hand. "There's nowhere I'd rather be right now." Turning to her new husband, she whispered something. Julian nodded, smiling warmly at me. Then Rebecca kicked off her heels, gathered her gown, and followed me to the kitchen. Miguel's eyebrows shot up when he saw the bride enter. "What's happening?" "A reunion," I said simply. "Rebecca's going to help with the souffles." Rebecca washed her hands and accepted the apron Miguel offered, tying it over her wedding gown. For a moment, she looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure if she'd be welcome at my side after everything that had happened. "Start whisking the egg whites," I instructed gently. "Remember, the key is soft peaks, not stiff," she finished. "Too stiff and they won't rise properly," I smiled. "You remembered." "I remember everything you taught me," she said quietly as she began whisking. "I've just been too proud to admit it." We worked in harmony, moving around each other with the familiar rhythm of two people who had cooked together for years. Rebecca folded the chocolate mixture with the perfect touch, gentle but thorough. Together, we filled the ramekins, creating perfect little domes ready for the oven. 6 minutes, I said as we slid the first batch in. "Not a second more." "I know," she nodded. "You used to let me set the timer and watch through the oven window. It was like magic to me how they would rise." "It's still magic," I said, "even after all these years." As we prepared the second batch, Rebecca spoke again, her voice low so only I could hear. "Mom, when James announced your cookbook, I was shocked, but also so proud. All these years I thought you were standing still while I was moving forward. But you've been growing too, haven't you?" I nodded. "Life doesn't stop just because your children leave home. I've been exploring, learning, developing. The cookbook started as a way to honor the women I worked with in school kitchens. Their creativity, their knowledge, their dignity. It became something bigger." "I should have asked," she said, regret heavy in her voice. "I should have cared about your life." "Yes," I agreed, not softening the truth. "You should have." The timer went off. We opened the oven carefully, both leaning back to avoid disturbing the delicate soufflés with our breath. They had risen perfectly, golden brown tops puffed proudly above the rims of the ramekins. "Beautiful," Rebecca whispered. "Quick now," I said. They wait for no one. Miguel's team sprang into action, each server taking 2 soufflés on a tray, rushing them to the dining room with practiced efficiency. Rebecca and I prepared the next batch, then the next, until all 300 soufflés had been baked and served. The sounds from the dining room told us everything we needed to know: murmurs of delight, spontaneous applause. Soufflés were a risk, an act of culinary bravado, but we had pulled it off. When the last soufflé left the kitchen, Rebecca untied her apron and turned to face me. "Mom," she began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. "It's all right," I said, though it wasn't, not yet. "We should get you back to your guests." "No," she said firmly. "It's not all right, and I need to say this. I've been horrible to you. Ungrateful. Ashamed. I looked at you and saw everything I was trying to escape, the struggle, the sacrifice, the hard work without recognition. I wanted people to think I was born special, not made through love and labor." I remained silent, letting her continue. "But today," she said, her voice breaking, "watching you command that kitchen, hearing you explain the menu to those people who would have dismissed you without a second thought. I've never been more proud to be your daughter, and I've never been more ashamed of myself." I took her hands in mine. "Rebecca, I didn't come here today to humiliate you or ruin your wedding. I came because, despite everything, you're my daughter, and I love you. But love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. It means teaching each other how to be better." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I want to be better. I want to try again, if you'll let me." Before I could answer, the kitchen doors swung open. Julian stood there, his face alight with excitement. "Rebecca, Martha, everyone's asking for you both." The soufflés were a triumph. Even my mother admits she's never tasted anything like them. Rebecca looked at me questioningly. I nodded. Together, we walked back into the dining room, where the applause began the moment we appeared. This time, when Rebecca introduced me, her voice was clear and proud. "This is my mother, Martha Sullivan. Everything beautiful about this meal, about me as a chef, began with her." As the room erupted in applause, I realized that the vindication I had sought wasn't about public recognition after all. It was about being seen, truly seen, by the person who mattered most. My daughter had finally recognized not just my worth as a chef, but my worth as her mother. The wound between us wasn't healed. That would take time and consistent effort on both our parts. But standing there in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The rest of the evening unfolded like a dream. The dessert was declared a miracle. 300 individual soufflés, each one perfect. The dance floor filled. The band played and champagne flowed. Throughout it all, I found myself drawn into conversations with guests who suddenly discovered I was worth talking to. "Martha, those soufflés were extraordinary," gushed a man who introduced himself as the owner of 3 upscale restaurants in Boston. "The technique, the timing, I've never seen it done on this scale." "The sauce with the lamb," said another guest, a well-dressed woman with a French accent. "My grandmother in Provence made something similar, but yours has more depth. Would you consider sharing the recipe?" Even Mrs. Harrington seemed to have recalibrated her assessment of me. She approached as I stood by the dessert table watching the celebration. "Martha," she said, her voice carefully modulated, "I must say, your culinary skills are unexpected. Julian tells me you trained Rebecca?" "I taught her the basics," I replied. "She developed her own style over time." Mrs. Harrington nodded, clearly struggling with this new reality. "Well, it seems she comes from more accomplished roots than I realized." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. I accepted it with a polite nod. "Diana," called Elaine, the silver-haired woman who had stood up for me earlier, "stop monopolizing Martha. Some of us want a word with the chef of the hour. Mrs. Harrington's smile tightened, but she stepped aside. Elaine linked her arm through mine, guiding me away. "Don't mind Diana," she said quietly. "She's always measured people by their bank accounts, not their character." Now, about my dinner series, I was serious. I host 12 exclusive dinners a year, featuring the most interesting culinary talents. Would you consider being my guest chef for the fall event? I blinked in surprise. "You're serious? You don't even know my professional background." "I know. What I tasted tonight," she replied firmly. "That tells me everything I need to know. Besides, James Porter doesn't waste his time on mediocre talent, and he clearly thinks you're exceptional." Before I could respond, James himself appeared at my side. "Martha, there you are. I've been looking for you." Elaine smiled. "I'll leave you two to talk. Martha, call me tomorrow about the dinner series." She pressed a business card into my hand and drifted away. James's eyes twinkled. "Making connections already? Good. You've been hidden in institutional kitchens far too long." This wasn't exactly how I planned to step into the spotlight, I admitted. "The best entrances are often unplanned," he replied. "Now, about your cookbook. The publisher is interested in fast-tracking it for a holiday release. The angle is perfect. The hidden culinary wisdom of school cafeterias, revealed by a master who worked in the trenches for decades." "Fast-tracking?" I echoed, feeling slightly overwhelmed. "I'm still finalizing some of the recipes." "You have 3 weeks," he said briskly, "and I'd like to feature you in next month's issue of the review. The Mother Behind the Star, a look at how Rebecca Sullivan's celebrated techniques originate from your teaching." I shook my head, trying to process the rapid turn of events. Just hours ago, I had been the invisible mother, relegated to a handwritten note card instead of a proper invitation. Now I was being offered professional opportunities I'd never dreamed possible. James misinterpreted my hesitation. Too confrontational? We could soften the angle. "Culinary legacy, how Martha Sullivan's techniques shaped a new generation." Rebecca would come across well, I promise. "It's not that," I said slowly. "I'm just processing. Everything's happening very fast." He nodded understandingly. "Take the night to think about it. We'll talk tomorrow. But Martha," he added, his voice serious, "don't miss this moment. You've earned it." As James walked away, I found myself alone for the first time since the revelation. I watched the celebration from a quiet corner. Rebecca and Julian dancing, guests laughing, servers clearing dishes. The evening was winding down, but something new was just beginning. A light touch on my elbow made me turn. It was Julian, looking slightly flushed from dancing. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said warmly. "May I have this dance?" I hesitated. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I," he confessed with a boyish smile. "But it seems important somehow." I allowed him to lead me to the dance floor. As we moved awkwardly to a slow song, he spoke quietly. "I want you to know that I had no idea about the note card invitation. Rebecca told me you couldn't attend the pre-wedding events because of your work schedule." I kept my expression neutral. "I see." "If I had known..." He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "What I'm trying to say is that I was raised to respect family. All family. My mother can be difficult, but that's not how I want to live my life with Rebecca." I studied his face, handsome, privileged, but with a sincerity that seemed genuine. "Julian, why did you marry my daughter?" The blunt question caught him off guard. Because I love her, of course." "And what do you love about her?" He blinked. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "Her passion, her determination, the way she lights up when she talks about food. The fact that she worked harder than anyone I know to build something of her own. Those qualities," I said gently, "didn't come from nowhere. Understanding dawned in his eyes. From you. She got them from you. I nodded. Rebecca has always wanted more than what she had. That's not a bad thing. Ambition drives us forward. But sometimes, in reaching for what's ahead, she forgets to honor what's behind. I want to help her remember, Julian said earnestly. If you'll give me a chance? The song ended and we stopped dancing. I looked at this young man, born to privilege but seemingly capable of seeing beyond it. Sunday dinners? I said firmly. Once a month at my house. Nothing fancy. Just family. That's my condition. Julian's face broke into a genuine smile. Done. And Mrs. Sullivan? I make a decent chocolate chip cookie. Maybe you could give me some pointers. I couldn't help but smile back. We'll start with the basics. As Julian returned to his bride, Rebecca caught my eye from across the room. She excused herself from a conversation and made her way to me, her gown sweeping elegantly around her. What were you and Julian talking about? She asked, a note of worry in her voice. Sunday dinners, once a month. He agreed. Rebecca's eyes widened. He did? He seems to value family, all family. She had the grace to look ashamed. Mom, about everything. The note card, the way I treated you. I held up a hand to stop her. Not tonight. Tonight is for celebrating. We'll have plenty of time to talk. She nodded, relief washing over her face. Does this mean, do you forgive me? I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't a moment, Rebecca. It's a process. We're at the beginning of that process, not the end. She accepted this with a solemnity I hadn't seen in her for years. I understand. And I'm willing to do the work, Mom. I promise. Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught our attention. A latecomer had arrived, a distinguished-looking man in his 70s, impeccably dressed despite the late hour. Who is that? I asked, noticing how the Harrington seemed to straighten at his arrival. Thomas Crawford, Rebecca whispered. He owns half the restaurants in Boston, including 3 with Michelin stars. The Harringtons have been trying to get his investment in a new development project for months. I watched as Mr. Crawford was quickly surrounded by guests eager to greet him. Mrs. Harrington practically glided across the floor to welcome him personally. Thomas, we're so honored you could make it, even for the end of the celebration, she gushed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Wouldn't have missed it, Diana, he replied, his voice carrying easily. Got delayed in New York. But I heard from James Porter that I needed to meet the chef behind tonight's menu. Something about the most extraordinary lamb sauce he's tasted in decades. Mrs. Harrington's smile faltered slightly. Yes, well, the catering was quite good. Now, let me introduce you to the Baldwins. They've just acquired that property in the Seaport district we discussed. In a minute, Diana, Mr. Crawford said firmly. First, the chef. James was quite insistent. Mrs. Harrington looked around helplessly, clearly torn between her desire to impress Crawford with her connections and her reluctance to acknowledge my role in the evening's success. Rebecca squeezed my hand. This is your moment, Mom. Go. I hesitated. All my life, I had been content to remain in the background, to let others take credit for my work, to find satisfaction in quiet accomplishment, rather than public acclaim. But something had shifted. The woman who had meekly accepted a note card instead of an invitation was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who had fed 300 of Boston's elite with her bare hands and made them weep with pleasure. Someone who had turned necessity into art, constraints into creativity. Someone who had earned respect not through wealth or connection, but through the honest work of her hands and the wisdom of her experience. That woman, the real Martha Sullivan, deserved to be seen. I straightened my shoulders and crossed the room to where Thomas Crawford stood. Mr. Crawford, I said, extending my hand. I'm Martha Sullivan, the chef responsible for tonight's menu. His eyebrows rose slightly as he took in my simple navy dress and practical shoes. Then he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his austere face. "Mrs. Sullivan, the pleasure is mine. That lamb sauce, extraordinary. Old-world technique with a modern sensibility. And the soufflés. 300 perfect soufflés. I've been in this business 40 years, and I've never seen it done." "Thank you," I said simply. "It was a labor of love. James tells me you have a cookbook coming out." "Invisible Hands, is it? Brilliant title." Mrs. Harrington looked between us, clearly struggling to reconcile this interaction with her previous assessment of me. "Thomas," she interjected, "Martha is actually Rebecca's mother. Isn't that a lovely coincidence?" Crawford's eyes sharpened with interest. "Rebecca Sullivan of Homestead? Your daughter? Well, now it makes sense. The talent runs in the family. I smiled. "Actually, Mr. Crawford, my daughter learned from me. Every chef builds on the foundation laid by those who came before." He nodded appreciatively. "Well said. And please, call me Thomas. I have a proposition for you, Martha. I'm opening a new restaurant this fall. A return to fundamentals, celebrating traditional techniques with modern presentation. I've been looking for an executive chef with exactly your sensibility. Would you consider it?" The room seemed to still around me. Mrs. Harrington's face froze in an expression of disbelief. From the corner of my eye, I could see Rebecca watching, her hands clasped tightly together. "That's a generous offer," I said carefully. "But I have other commitments at the moment. My cookbook, for one, and Elaine Burke just invited me to be guest chef for her fall dinner series." Crawford's eyebrows rose again. "Elaine's series? Very exclusive. She must have been impressed." "She was," I confirmed, feeling a surge of confidence. "But I would be open to discussing consultation work, perhaps helping you develop your foundational menu, training your kitchen staff in the techniques." He smiled slowly. "A consultant. Even better. You retain your independence, I get your expertise. Shall we discuss terms over lunch next week?" I nodded, aware that Diana Harrington was watching this exchange with growing bewilderment. "I'd be delighted." "Excellent!" Crawford turned to Mrs. Harrington. "Diana, you've been holding out on me. All these years trying to impress me with imported chefs, and the real talent was in your family all along." Mrs. Harrington managed a tight smile. "Yes, well, Martha has certainly surprised us all tonight. The best talents often hide in plain sight," Crawford replied. "Now, I believe you mentioned the Baldwins?" As Mrs. Harrington led Crawford away, I stood alone in the center of the room, feeling strangely light. The weight of invisibility I had carried for so long had lifted, replaced by something new, recognition. Not just from strangers impressed by a meal, but from the people who mattered most. Rebecca approached slowly, a complex mixture of emotions playing across her face. "Thomas Crawford just offered you a restaurant," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "Do you know how many chefs would kill for that opportunity?" "He offered me a consultation position," I corrected. "And yes, I do know." "And you negotiated with him?" "On the spot. At my wedding reception." I smiled slightly. "I learned to negotiate feeding 800 children on a budget that would barely cover breakfast. Thomas Crawford is less intimidating than a cafeteria full of hungry teenagers." Rebecca laughed, a genuine sound that reminded me of the little girl who had once found such joy in our kitchen. "Mom, I don't know whether to be amazed or terrified. You're going to take the culinary world by storm, aren't you?" "I'm going to be myself," I replied simply. "For the first time in a very long time, I'm going to be exactly who I am. No apologies, no hiding." My daughter looked at me with new eyes, not with shame or dismissal, but with respect. perhaps even a touch of awe. "I think I'm just starting to understand who that is," she said softly. As the evening drew to a close, guests beginning to depart and the band playing their final songs, I gathered my things from the kitchen. Miguel and his team had already cleaned up, leaving everything spotless. "Martha," Miguel said, embracing me warmly. "What a night! I've already received 3 catering inquiries from guests." "Your touch is magic," I hugged him back. "Thank you, Miguel, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have," he said with a knowing smile. "But I'm glad I was here to see it." As I prepared to leave, Rebecca appeared. In the kitchen doorway, Julian beside her. "Mom," she called. "Where are you going? We have a car taking us to the hotel. Come with us. There's room." I shook my head. "I have my own arrangements. You two go ahead. It's your wedding night." "But we'll see you tomorrow. For brunch?" The question held a tentative hope. I considered this. The old Martha would have agreed immediately, eager to please, afraid to disappoint. But the new Martha, the woman who had stood in this kitchen and created art from love, who had negotiated with Thomas Crawford without flinching, she had different priorities. "No," I said gently. "I have plans tomorrow. James wants to discuss the cookbook, but I'll call you next week about those Sunday dinners." Rebecca nodded, acceptance replacing disappointment. "Next week. I'll look forward to it." I gathered my bag and walked through the silent, empty venue toward the exit. The cleanup crew was already striking the tables, the flowers being boxed for donation, the remnants of celebration being efficiently erased. But some things couldn't be erased. Some moments changed everything that came after. As I stepped outside, into the cool night air, I felt like a different person than the woman who had entered this building days ago. That woman had been defined by what she gave to others, valued only for her utility, invisible except when needed. This woman, the one walking confidently toward her future, she was defined by her talents, her knowledge, her worth. Not just as a mother, but as a chef, an artist, a woman with something to say and the courage to say it. The Rosewood estate gleamed behind me, lights still blazing from every window. Ahead lay a road I had never expected to travel, a road of opportunity, recognition, perhaps even a measure of fame. I smiled to myself as I hailed a taxi. Sometimes the most powerful form of forgiveness isn't what you offer others, but what you finally grant yourself. Permission to be seen. 6 months later, I stood in the gleaming kitchen of Elaine Burke's penthouse apartment, putting the finishing touches on the 7th course of my guest chef dinner. The exclusive event had sold out within hours of being announced, 12 of Boston's most influential food enthusiasts paying $1,000 each for the privilege of tasting my food. "Martha, darling, they're absolutely enchanted," Elaine whispered, as she swept into the kitchen, elegant in a midnight blue dress. "Thomas Crawford is telling everyone you're the most important culinary discovery in Boston this decade." I smiled as I carefully plated the heritage pork with my grandmother's secret apple sage sauce. "Hardly a discovery, Elaine. I've been cooking for 50 years. "Yes, but in hiding," she replied, watching my hands move with practiced precision. Like a culinary Cinderella, scrubbing floors by day and creating magic by night. "School cafeterias aren't exactly floors," I said mildly. "You know what I mean. All that talent, all that knowledge, confined to institutional cooking. It's criminal." She picked up a spoon and tasted a drop of sauce that had fallen on the counter. Divine. Absolutely divine. I handed the completed plates to the 2 servers. Elaine had hired for the evening, both culinary students who had begged for the opportunity to work alongside me. In the 6 months since Rebecca's wedding, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. My cookbook, Invisible. Hans Ars had debuted to critical acclaim. with James Porter's glowing review in the National Culinary Review, calling it a revolutionary reclamation of institutional cooking wisdom and required reading for any serious chef. 3 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list had led to a contract for 2 more books. The consulting work with Thomas Crawford had expanded to 4 restaurants, with a special menu at his flagship establishment, the Martha Sullivan Experience, booked solid through the next year. Cooking schools were calling, asking me to teach masterclasses. A streaming service had approached my agent, yes, I now had an agent, about a potential documentary series exploring the hidden culinary traditions of institutional cooking across America. At 65, I had suddenly become the unlikely it girl of the culinary world. As the servers carried the plates out to the dining room, I took a moment to breathe, to center myself. The whirlwind of attention was exhilarating, but sometimes overwhelming. I missed the quiet rhythms of my old life, the simple satisfaction of feeding hungry children, the anonymity that had been both my shelter and my prison. But I didn't miss the invisibility. I didn't miss being taken for granted, and I certainly didn't miss being ashamed of who I was and what I knew. As I prepared the final dessert course, a modern take on the humble cafeteria apple crisp, elevated with vanilla bean, cardamom, and a touch of rosewater, the kitchen door swung open again. This time, it was Rebecca who entered, dressed simply in black pants and a white chef's coat. "Mom," she said quietly, "need any help?" I looked up in surprise. Rebecca wasn't on the guest list for tonight's dinner, and she should have been at a homestead, overseeing the Friday night service. "What are you doing here?" I asked, continuing to work as we spoke. "Left Julian in charge," she replied, washing her hands at the sink. "Thought you might need an extra pair of hands for the finale." I hesitated, then nodded toward the stand mixer. "You could whip the creme fraiche, medium soft peaks." She nodded, and set to work, falling into the rhythm beside me as if we had never been apart. For several minutes we worked in comfortable silence, the only sounds the whir of the mixer and the gentle clink of spoons against bowls. "Your review in the Globe came out today," Rebecca said finally. 5 stars. They called you the culinary. World's most refreshing voice in decades, I smiled slightly. "I saw it." "Mom," she hesitated, then continued. "Are you happy with all of this?" I considered the question as I arranged thin apple slices in a precise pattern. "I'm satisfied. It's nice to be recognized for what I know, to have people value my perspective." Rebecca nodded, carefully folding the whipped creme fraiche. "You deserve it. All of it. I just worry sometimes that it's overwhelming." "It can be," I admitted. "But I'm learning to set boundaries, to say no when I need to. Like you did with me," she said quietly. "At the wedding. You could have humiliated me in front of everyone. You had every right to, but you didn't." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The past 6 months had changed her too. There was a softness to her that hadn't been there before, a thoughtfulness. "Humiliating you wouldn't have served either of us," I said. It might have felt satisfying in the moment, but it would have poisoned everything that came after. Rebecca nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. "The Sunday dinners have been really good, Mom. Julian looks forward to them all month. So do I." The monthly family dinners had indeed become a cherished tradition. Rebecca and Julian would arrive at my modest home, Julian often bringing a new cookbook for me to sign. He had become an avid collector of cookbooks since the wedding. We would cook together, all 3 of us, and sit at my small kitchen table to enjoy the results. Sometimes we talked about food, sometimes about their lives, sometimes about my suddenly busy schedule. But mostly we were just family, imperfect, healing, growing together. "They've been good for me too," I acknowledged. "Though Julian needs to stop trying to impress me with those complicated recipes. The boy nearly set my kitchen on fire last month with that flambe attempt." Rebecca laughed. He's determined to earn your approval. He has it, I said simply. He makes you happy. He respects me. That's enough. She smiled, then glanced toward the dining room. What about Mrs. Harrington? Has she come around? I chuckled softly. Diana Harrington had been the slowest to adjust to the new reality, where her daughter-in-law's formerly invisible mother was now a culinary celebrity whose name carried more weight in Boston's food circles than her own. She sent me flowers after the Times review, I said. The card said, "Congratulations on your unexpected success." I suppose that's progress. Rebecca rolled her eyes. She asked me last week if I was worried about living in your shadow now. Can you believe it? After all those years of me pretending, you didn't exist, now she thinks I'm jealous of your success. And are you? I asked, the question direct but gentle. Rebecca's hands stilled for a moment. No, she said thoughtfully. Not jealous. Proud, definitely. Amazed. A little intimidated, maybe. But mostly I'm just grateful that I get to be your daughter. That you gave me another chance. I nodded, accepting her words. Our relationship was still healing, the wounds still tender in places. But with each Sunday dinner, each honest conversation, each moment of genuine connection, the scar tissue grew stronger. The crème fraîche is ready, Rebecca said, holding out the bowl for my inspection. Perfect, I confirmed. Now for the assembly. Together, we plated the final course, working in silent harmony as we had done at the wedding, as we had done when she was a child standing on a step stool beside me. When the last plate was perfected, Rebecca stepped back. They're beautiful, Mom. I nodded, satisfied with our work. They'll taste even better than they look. The servers entered to collect the desserts, their eyes widening at the artful presentation. Chef Sullivan, one of them whispered reverently, "These are amazing." I smiled at the young woman's awe. Thank you, Sarah. And remember what I told you about the secret to a perfect apple crisp? Balance and restraint, she replied promptly. Let the fruit speak for itself. Exactly. Now, careful with those plates. They're heavier than they look. As the servers left with our creations, Rebecca turned to me, a hesitant expression on her face. Mom, before you go out there, I wanted to ask you something. A favor, actually. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of favor? Homestead is doing a special event next month. A 10-year anniversary dinner. I was wondering if you might consider being my guest chef for the night. We could create the menu together. A mother-daughter collaboration. The request took me by surprise. In all the months since the wedding, in all our Sunday dinners and careful conversations, Rebecca had kept our reconciliation private. Homestead was her domain, her achievement. To invite me in, publicly, professionally, was a significant step. You're sure? I asked. She nodded, eyes steady. I'm sure. It's time people know where I came from. Who taught me? No more pretending. I considered her offer, thinking of all it represented. Not just professional recognition, but personal acknowledgement. Rebecca was ready to stand beside me, not as a reluctant daughter embarrassed by her cafeteria manager mother, but as a chef proud of her culinary heritage. I'd be honored, I said simply. Rebecca's face lit up with genuine joy. Really? Thank you, Mom. It means everything. Elaine poked her head into the kitchen. Martha, darling, they're clamoring for you out here. The pork was, apparently, a religious experience. Thomas Crawford is demanding to know how you got the sauce so silky, and someone from the Times wants to schedule an interview. I nodded. I'll be right there. As Elaine disappeared again, Rebecca stepped forward and surprised me with a quick, fierce hug. Go enjoy your moment, Mom. You've earned it. I hugged her back, then straightened my chef's coat, a beautiful professional one Rebecca had given me for my birthday, with my name embroidered above the heart. Will you stay? I asked. There's plenty of food left. She shook her head. This is your night. I'll see you Sunday for dinner. I nodded, understanding. Some journeys we walk together, others we must walk alone. Tonight was my journey, my moment to step fully into the light of recognition after decades in the shadows. I walked into the dining room to enthusiastic applause. I caught a glimpse of Rebecca slipping quietly out the service entrance. How far we had come from that painful phone call 6 months ago, when she had begged me to remain invisible at her wedding. The transformation wasn't just in my professional status or in how the world saw me. It was in how I saw myself, not as a background character in someone else's story, but as the protagonist of my own. 2 weeks later, I stood in my kitchen, preparing for another Sunday dinner. The cookbook signing earlier that day had been exhausting. 300 people waiting in line for hours, sharing stories about their mothers and grandmothers who had cooked in school cafeterias, church kitchens, military mess halls. Your book gave me permission to be proud of my mother's work, one young woman had told me, tears in her eyes. She fed hundreds of children every day for 30 years, and I never once thought of her as a chef until I read your words. Those moments made all the chaos worthwhile. The interviews, the travel, the constant demands on my time and energy. I was giving voice to generations of women whose culinary wisdom had been dismissed as mere home cooking or institutional food. I was redefining what it meant to be a chef, expanding the circle to include those who had been cooking out of necessity rather than ambition. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Rebecca and Julian were early. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to answer it. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Rebecca and Julian who stood on my porch. It was Mrs. Harrington, Diana, looking uncomfortable but determined in an expensive casual outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Martha," she said stiffly, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Actually, I'm expecting Rebecca and Julian." "For dinner soon?" I replied, making no move to invite her in. She nodded, clearly struggling with whatever had brought her to my door. "This won't take long. She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "I wanted to apologize. For the wedding. For how I treated you. It was inexcusable." I studied her face, searching for sincerity beneath the polished exterior. "Why now?" "Because it's been bothering me," she admitted. "And because Julian asked me to. He said if I want to be part of their lives, part of any future grandchildren's lives, I need to make this right." I nodded slowly. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was an honest one. "Would you like to come in?" She looked startled by the invitation. "I wouldn't want to intrude on your family dinner." "It's just dinner, Diana. Food brings people together." "That's what it's for." She hesitated, then nodded. "If you're sure it's all right." I stepped aside to let her in. "I'm making lasagna, Rebecca's favorite from when she was a child. Nothing fancy." "I'm sure it's wonderful," she said, following me into the kitchen. "Everything you make is." I handed her an apron. "If you're staying." "You're helping. You can tear the mozzarella." She stared at the apron as if I'd handed her a live snake. "I don't cook." "Today you do," I said firmly. "That's the price of admission to this kitchen." Slowly, tentatively, Diana Harrington tied on the apron. I demonstrated how to tear the fresh mozzarella into rough pieces instead of slicing it. "This way, it melts better," I explained. "Creates pockets of cheese throughout the dish." She nodded, copying my technique with surprising care. "I never learned to cook," she admitted quietly. "We always had staff for that." "It's never too late to learn," I replied. When Rebecca and Julian arrived 30 minutes later, they froze in the doorway, staring at the unexpected sight of Diana Harrington in an apron, carefully layering lasagna noodles under my guidance. "Mom?" Julian said in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Diana looked up, a smear of tomato sauce on her cheek. "Making lasagna, apparently. Martha's been teaching me." Rebecca's eyes met mine, a silent question in them. I nodded slightly, letting her know it was okay. "Well," Rebecca said, hanging up her coat, "you couldn't ask for a better teacher." Diana smiled tentatively. "I'm beginning to understand that." As the four of us worked together to finish preparing the meal, Julian making the salad, Rebecca stirring the sauce, Diana continuing with the lasagna assembly under my supervision, I felt a strange sense of completion. The circle that had been broken for so long was slowly, imperfectly mending. Later, as we sat around my small kitchen table enjoying the fruits of our labor, Diana took a bite of lasagna and closed her eyes in appreciation. "This is remarkable," she said. "So simple, but so complete." "That's Mom's specialty," Rebecca said, a note of pride in her voice. "Taking everyday ingredients and making them extraordinary." "Not extraordinary," I corrected gently. "Just authentic. Food doesn't need to be fancy to be good. It just needs to be made with care and knowledge." "And love," Julian added, reaching for a second helping. "Isn't that what you always say, Martha? That the secret ingredient is love?" I smiled, looking around at this unlikely family gathered at my table. My once estranged daughter, her kind-hearted husband, his formerly disdainful mother. Not perfect, not without complications, but here, present, connected through the simple act of sharing a meal. "Yes," I said softly. "The secret ingredient is always love." And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of my kitchen and the people who now recognized my worth, I knew that the greatest vindication wasn't in the cookbook, sales, or the restaurant consultations, or the media attention. It was in this, being truly seen, finally heard, genuinely valued. Not just as Martha Sullivan, the surprise culinary sensation who had cooked for her daughter's wedding without being properly invited, but as Martha Sullivan, a woman who had spent her life nurturing others through food and who had finally learned to nourish herself as well. 2 years to the day after Rebecca's wedding, I stood in the kitchen of my new cooking school, Foundations, surveying the bright, airy space with a sense of wonder. 10 professionally equipped cooking stations faced a central demonstration area. Large windows allowed natural light to flood the converted warehouse space, while exposed brick walls displayed framed photos documenting my journey, me in my school cafeteria uniform from decades ago, alongside recent magazine covers featuring my smiling face. "What do you think? Ready for the grand opening tomorrow?" asked Sam, my business partner and former school district colleague who had handled the financial and operational side of this venture. "I think I can't quite believe it's real," I admitted, running my hand along the smooth marble countertop. "At 67, most people are settling into retirement." Sam laughed. "Most people aren't Martha Sullivan. Besides, this isn't just any cooking school. This is a revolution." She wasn't exaggerating. Foundations was the first cooking school in the country specifically designed to honor and elevate institutional cooking techniques. Our inaugural class of 20 students included executive chefs from high-end restaurants, food service directors from hospitals and universities, and cookbook authors eager to learn what I called the forgotten fundamentals, the techniques that had sustained communities for generations without the spotlight of culinary fame. The phone in my pocket buzzed. A text from Rebecca. "Just landed. We'll drop bags at hotel and come straight to the preview dinner. So excited to see the school finished." Rebecca and Julian had flown in specifically for tomorrow's grand opening. In the 2 years since the wedding, my relationship with my daughter had evolved into something I'd never dared to hope for. Genuine partnership, both personal and professional. The mother-daughter dinner at Homestead for the restaurant's anniversary had been a resounding success, leading to a quarterly collaboration we called Homecoming. Special evenings when Rebecca and I created menus that traced the evolution of our shared culinary language. Diners would book months in advance for the opportunity to taste our generational dialogue expressed through food. My second cookbook, From School Lunch to Soufflé, Elevating Everyday Techniques, had debuted at #1 on the bestseller list, with Rebecca writing a touching foreword acknowledging her culinary debt to me. "Martha, the flowers are here," called Elaine, bustling into the kitchen. After championing me at her dinner series, Elaine had become not just a supporter, but a dear friend. Now she served as our events coordinator, bringing her social connections and impeccable taste to Foundations. The tables are set in the event space, the catering staff is prepped, and Thomas Crawford just called to confirm he'll be here in an hour to preview the space before tonight's dinner. Thomas had been instrumental in securing investors for the school, convincing them that what I offered was not just culinary education, but cultural preservation. "Martha isn't teaching cooking," he'd told them. "She's safeguarding a heritage that deserves respect." "Perfect," I said, checking my watch. "I need to head upstairs and change before the guests arrive." The converted warehouse included a small apartment on the top floor, my new home. After decades in my modest house, I had finally sold it to fund my portion of the school. The apartment wasn't large, but it had a stunning kitchen with a view of the city skyline, and it was mine, a space that reflected who I had become. As I changed into a simple but elegant black dress, I thought about the journey of the past 2 years. The media attention had eventually faded to a manageable level. The initial frenzy of offers, television shows, product endorsements, restaurant concepts, had overwhelmed me until I learned to be selective, to choose paths that aligned with my values rather than those that simply offered the most money or exposure. What remained was purpose, clear, focused, and deeply satisfying. I was changing the conversation about what constituted real cooking and who deserved the title chef. School cafeteria workers across the country had written to thank me for giving dignity to their work. Culinary schools were updating curricula to include institutional cooking techniques. Food writers were rethinking their dismissal of large-scale cooking as merely functional rather than artistic. And most importantly, I was happy. Not with the fame or recognition, but with the sense of completeness, of having finally integrated all aspects of myself into a cohesive whole. The preview dinner that evening brought together 50 influential figures in the culinary world: critics, chefs, educators, and investors. I stood at the entrance to the event space, greeting guests alongside Sam and Elaine. "Martha, this is extraordinary," gushed Jamie Chen, editor of Culinary Quarterly. "The space perfectly balances professional rigor with accessibility, just like your cooking." "Thank you, Jamie. That's exactly what we were aiming for." Thomas Crawford arrived with his wife, both embracing me warmly. "The school exceeds all expectations, Martha. You've created something truly significant here." As I guided them toward their table, I spotted Diana Harrington entering with her husband Richard. Our relationship had evolved into a respectful, if not entirely warm, détente. The Sunday dinners continued, with Diana occasionally joining us, always bringing expensive wine and gradually learning to navigate my kitchen without looking completely lost. "Martha," Diana said, air kissing my cheek. "The space is simply marvelous. So industrial chic. And I hear the first class is already oversubscribed." "We had to add a second cohort," I confirmed. "The response has been overwhelming." "Well, of course it has," she said with surprising sincerity. "Everyone wants to learn from the best." Richard, who had always been more genuine than his wife, shook my hand warmly. "Congratulations, Martha. Julian speaks of you with such admiration. You've made quite an impact on him." I smiled, thinking of my son-in-law who had indeed become an enthusiastic home cook under my tutelage. "He's a quick study, and he makes my daughter happy. That's what matters most." As Diana and Richard moved toward their assigned table, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find Rebecca and Julian standing there, both looking slightly windblown from their rushed arrival. "Mom," Rebecca said, embracing me tightly. "It's magnificent. All of it." "You haven't even seen the teaching kitchen yet," I laughed. hugging her back. I don't need to. I can feel it. This place has your spirit in every corner. Julian hugged me next. Sorry we're cutting it so close. The flight was delayed, and then traffic from the airport was a nightmare. You're here now, I said, patting his cheek affectionately. That's what matters. As we walked toward their table, Rebecca linked her arm through mine. I have news, she whispered, her eyes sparkling. But it can wait until after your big moment. Once all the guests were seated, Sam clinked her glass for attention and introduced me. I stood, looking out at the gathered faces. Some I had known for decades, others I had met only through this unexpected late-life reinvention. Thank you all for coming tonight, I began. Foundations represents more than just a cooking school, to me. It represents a recognition that culinary wisdom comes in many forms, from many sources. For too long, we've privileged certain types of cooking while dismissing others as merely functional. I gestured to the photographs lining the walls. Cafeteria workers, hospital cooks, military chefs, all captured with dignity in their workspaces. These are the invisible hands that have fed our communities for generations. They cook not for acclaim or artistic expression, but out of necessity and care. Their techniques, scaling recipes for hundreds, maximizing nutrition on tight budgets, ensuring food safety under challenging conditions, these are not lesser skills. They are foundational to our culinary heritage. The room had grown quiet, everyone listening intently. 2 years ago, I was invisible too. A former school cafeteria manager who had taught her daughter everything she knew about cooking, but who wasn't even properly invited to her wedding. I saw Diana Harrington shift uncomfortably in her seat, but I continued without rancor. When I agreed to cook for that wedding behind the scenes, I thought I was doing it out of desperation, a final act of maternal sacrifice. What I didn't realize was that it would become an act of liberation. By feeding those wedding guests, I ended up nourishing myself in ways I never expected. I looked at Rebecca, who was watching me with tears in her eyes. Foundations exists because I finally understood that my knowledge had value, that my experience mattered, that my voice deserved to be heard. And more importantly, that there are thousands of cooks out there, in school kitchens and hospital galleys and community centers, whose voices deserve to be heard too. I raised my glass. So tonight we celebrate not just the opening of a cooking school, but the recognition of a culinary tradition that has sustained us all, whether we knew it or not. The applause was immediate and heartfelt. As I sat down, I caught Rebecca dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. After dinner, as guests mingled and toured the facility, Rebecca pulled me into a quiet corner, Julian standing protectively beside her. Mom, we have something to tell you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm pregnant, 3 months along. The world seemed to still for a moment as her words sank in. My daughter, my only child, was going to have a child of her own. A baby, I whispered, emotions swelling in my chest. I'm going to be a grandmother. Yes, Julian said, his arm around Rebecca's waist. And we've already decided, if it's a girl, we're naming her Martha. Tears filled my eyes as I embraced them both. A baby, I repeated, hardly able to believe it. A new beginning. Rebecca placed her hand over her still flat stomach. We want you to be part of everything, Mom. Every step. No more exclusion. Ever. And, Julian added with a grin, we're counting on you to teach her to cook. Both of us want our child to learn from the best, right from the start. Later that night, after all the guests had departed and the catering staff had cleaned up, I stood alone in the teaching kitchen, savoring the silence and the promise of what was to come. Tomorrow, these stations would be filled with students, eager to learn. Next week, I would begin recording classes for an online education platform. The month after that, I was scheduled to give a keynote address at the International Culinary Education Conference. And in 6 months, A new life would join our family. A grandchild who would never question her grandmother's worth, who would know from the beginning that wisdom comes in many forms, that love can be expressed through a perfectly prepared school lunch just as profoundly as through a 7-course gourmet meal. I ran my hand along the smooth countertop, imagining small hands someday learning to knead dough there, just as Rebecca once had at my kitchen counter. Life had come full circle, but the circle had expanded to include so much more than I ever dreamed possible. From a handwritten note card to a cooking school bearing my name. From invisibility to influence. From exclusion to embraced. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to my apartment, I thought about how preparing a meal for my daughter's wedding had changed everything. Not because the guests had been impressed, though they were. Not because it had launched my unexpected career, though it had. But because in the process of feeding others, I had finally learned to nourish myself, to reclaim my worth, to assert my knowledge, to stand firmly in the light and say without apology or hesitation, "This is who I am. This is what I know. This is the wisdom I bring to the table." And there was nothing more satisfying than that. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.